Welcome to today's devotional. We had a great conversation yesterday as we were exploring backgrounds and personal experiences of both Pastor Arlie and Richard. And I so appreciated as Richard shared about how his identity is rooted primarily in Christ and how that really changes the way that he experiences the world around him.
I'm a child of God first, who happens to be black. And so my identity has always been rooted in my Christian faith and my Christian identity.
Jump in with us as we continue the conversation today. I know for those who are joining us today, majority are going to be white and have not had probably much personal experience with encounters in racism. We would like to hear, as much as you're comfortable sharing, some experiences that you've had past and also present in our own community. Can you share a little bit with us?
And before we do, I think that's great, but what I'm thinking is, I'm curious, did you grow up thinking about your color or not? Because I don't think I ever thought I'm white. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, did you grow up thinking I'm black?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
And it was because there were certain places that we would go, and I grew up in a middle class. I had a middle class upbringing.
Sure.
And so I really was very fortunate compared to many. And because of my middle class upbringing, it afforded me the opportunity to go places and to do things that many others couldn't. But with that came this challenge. And so there have been times when, very early on, when I was called the N-word and didn't know how to react to that.
Sure.
I didn't hear it. It wasn't in my own community. But the older I got, the more exposed I got to areas outside of my own community. The more the fact that there is this division. The more apparent that became. And so, again, my parents and grandparents and other elders within my family, rather than react, and they could certainly see the reaction was one of shock and awe, to be perfectly honest. They immediately sat me down, and sat all my other siblings down. And we had very, very targeted conversations, and they simply said, it's now time for you to learn and understand the world that you're living in. And as part of that education, if you will, the thing that, again, was primarily forged in us was that no matter what, you are a child of God first, and you are no better than and you are no worse than anyone else, regardless of what anyone else may say to you. We want you to know that you are good enough just as you are. So even as a child, I heard that message.
Yeah. I remember talking to a friend of mine who was black, and she said she was 6 years old before she realized she was black. And so she was with another child, they were playing, and the child said, "Oh, your color is different than mine." And she went, "Oh, yeah, it is." And then they went on playing. It didn't matter. But it was like she just had never thought of that, in that context. Now, she was, I think, predominantly in a white neighborhood, but just never realized the difference. I just think that's interesting because...
Well, it's interesting because in the neighborhood that I grew up, my parents actually were the first ones to desegregate the neighborhood that I actually grew up in. So, for instance, when they bought this house, and by the way, they were also they were homeowners, which was in the '60s. That was a rarity.
Significant.
Big deal.
It was a big deal. So they actually were the first black family to move into the neighborhood where I grew up, and so I grew up again with black and white friends. And it's interesting because within the community of, we'll call it my neighborhood, we knew that we were black and white, but we just wanted to go out and play. So it was not an issue.
Right.
It wasn't until we would traverse outside of, quote unquote, the comfort zone or the neighborhood that we would encounter, that I would encounter some of these other kinds of
Which is
interactions.
interesting, because to me, what I'm hearing is really racism is a learned attitude. Because if you were able to grow up in an area where, there was mixed population, mixed ethnicity, and it wasn't a factor that was significant at that time, well, that must have meant that the parents were teaching that wasn't significant.
The worth and value of all people.
Correct. And I'm also curious if you can share with us what has been maybe some more of your personal encounters with racism that you've seen as you moved outside of that community, and specifically today as you live in our current central Pennsylvanian community, because I know there's just a lot of us that are not aware of what Black individuals or people of color would endure.
Well, professionally, I've experienced direct racism in being qualified, and this is not anything new, but it just happens to be my story. Competing for positions and going up against other people, and not getting the position when I was more than qualified and the most qualified individual among candidates. I can recall being told to my face, we're just going through the motions here. But we've already identified who we want to fill this position. So it's up to you if you want to continue through the interview process, but we've already
made our decision.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have heard, and again, that's throughout my career, but probably within the last 15 years, I'll even say since I've been here in Pennsylvania, professionally. Well, let me back up, because when I moved into executive leadership, again, moving from Baltimore to Oregon, it was a career move, and I moved to a predominantly white Catholic healthcare system. And myself and my boss, who was the CEO of this particular hospital, we were the only two senior executives out of a workforce of about 400 across 4 states that were part of the executive leadership team. We were the only two African Americans, and whenever we came together for executive retreats, I'd look around and it's just the two of us. So, those are the kinds of things that are just obvious to us, but not obvious to my white counterparts. They think that they are doing something great because, look, we have a woman, and we have a Black woman and a Black man. So we are filling that diversity.
Right.
So it still exists. Again, we have a lot. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. A kind of a funny story. When I was in the military, this was when I was in my early 20s, and I was living in North Dakota. Some friends and I, we were traveling from Grand Forks, North Dakota to Fargo, North Dakota, which is about 80 miles away. And we stopped at a Burger King. And as I'm standing in line, and Fargo is very much like central Pennsylvania.
Okay. Beautiful and wonderful.
I think that's what he meant.
Yeah.
I'm going with it.
Once again, I was the only Black person in the store. And a little boy was standing behind me in line, and he must have been about 4 years old. And he turned to his mother and he said, "Mommy, mommy, mommy, look, it's Michael Jackson." And and his mother was horrified. I mean, she was so embarrassed, and she turned to me and she said, "I'm just so sorry. He's never seen a Black person in person. He's always seen Black people on television." And I said, I understand that. And so I could have reacted one of two ways. I could have been offended and gotten defensive, or I could have used this opportunity to help to educate, and that's what I chose to do. And so in the line, I knelt down on my knee, got down to eye level with this young man, asked him his name, told him my name, And he was so fascinated because he just never saw a brown-skinned person live and in person. And he kept looking at me, and I said, "Do you want to touch my arm?" And he said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." So he did. And he said, he turned to his mother, he said, "Mommy, his skin is just as soft as ours." And then he looked at my hair, and back then I had hair. And I said, "Do you want to touch my hair?" And he said, "Could I?" Of course, by now, everyone in this Burger King is
absolutely
it's
riveted.
And he rubbed my hair, and he said, "Oh, it's so soft." I said, "Yeah, it is soft. It's a little different than yours, wouldn't you say?" He said, "Yeah, but it's really, really soft." And then that was it. He went back to his mother, and it was not a big deal. And I could tell, I am sure, I'm confident that probably stuck with him in a good way.
Right.
And I'm hoping that it stuck with those that were watching and observing. I hope that it had the impact that I intended. So, I've responded different ways as the situation warranted to quote unquote racism and people's overt, because people can be very overt about their opinions about me. And so I have learned how to, again, take it in stride and just deal with it. Always my attempt is to turn it into a learning opportunity. Now, some people are not interested in wanting to learn, and that's okay. I'm not here to force anybody to change their beliefs, etc. I feel like I have a responsibility to utilize my sphere of influence to make change. To do
What
that
about
in a
in
positive
the
way.
area here? Like, now you've chosen to stay here at Christ Wesleyan.
Yeah.
And yet we're probably a predominantly white church, predominantly white area.
No, you are.
I'm just trying to
Just in case you were wondering.
We are. Okay. So, but it's probably pretty reflective of our area.
Yes.
And yet you've deliberately chosen to stay
Yes.
here. So what have you experienced here and around?
So on the positive side, Sharon and I, we came to Central Pennsylvania. It was a career move. We came here and with the intention of being here max three years maybe, and then we were going to move to a warmer climate. But when we got here, we actually began to really, once we got to know people, we began to really kind of fall in love with the area. And again, because our Christian faith and being anchored in our faith is just so important to us. And when we walked through the doors of Christ Wesleyan and felt that warm, welcoming feeling that you hear people talk about, we experienced that from day one. And I think at that particular time, we had been looking for a church home for about a year. We had actually visited almost every church in this area, but it was, for one reason or the other, we just did not feel comfortable. But when we came here, we did so. And the reason why we felt comfortable is obviously because, Christ is the priority reason why we're here. Mm-hmm. And you do an excellent job. You're an excellent teacher, Pastor Arley.
Thank you.
But the people are wonderful here.
Thank you.
So that has been that's why we are still here. That's why we chose to stay here. But, on the dark side of things, I have certainly had my own personal encounters. For instance, in the town that I live in, actually just recently, I was sitting on my front porch, and Sharon and I were actually sitting on the front porch, and someone just rode by and just gave us the finger. I don't know who these people are, just because we're black. Yeah. We've been walking, we take long walks in our neighborhood, and we've heard people, walking on the other side, white power, white, for no, I'm a homeowner here in the neighborhood. Mm-hmm. I didn't ask for this. I didn't do anything other than walk down the street to evoke that. So it still happens. I've been cursed out by strangers at the gas station. for no apparent reason. So it still happens, and it's happening here within our area. But again, I'm not so naive to believe that everyone here in the area is is of the mindset of folks necessarily that I might encounter here at Christ Wesleyan.
Certainly.
But the fact of the matter is, it's everywhere.
It is.
It's everywhere. It's unfortunate to say that, but it is everywhere.